Hello there, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Generation Tech. My name is Alan, and recently one of our viewers, Patty Melt Enjoyer, terrific profile name, asked us a pretty interesting question. How does the Jedi Order get funded? I love this topic because it's one of those things that is rarely discussed in the lore, but the implications, the answer to this question can completely change how we view both the Jedi and the Republic. Now, Lucasfilm clearly wants to avoid this topic because it wants to preserve some kind of aura and mystery about the Jedi Order as an organization. And giving them a balance sheet and budget kind of turns them into just another non-profit organization, which cheapens the brand. And I think in universe, there's a similar mentality within the Jedi Order leadership on how the galaxy perceives the Jedi, right? Let's make it more mysterious and more kind of above the normal fray of governance. You know, forget about budgets and money. The Jedi rise above it. Historically speaking, the Jedi's relationship with the Republic is supposed to be almost a spiritual one, backed by lofty concepts like shared morals and values, and not necessarily an official charter or fiscal policy. But here's the thing, it doesn't really matter how powerful Master Yoda is or how disciplined Mace Windu is. If Steve down in the starship hangar isn't getting paid his salary, well, not much can happen for the Jedi. You know, Steve, despite not having the Force, makes sure that Master Yoda and Mace Windu's starfighters are fueled and ready to go. Without him, without the thousands of other workers and staff in the temple, the Jedi Order ceases to exist. Without some kind of funding, the Jedi Order will hardly be able to afford its tiny outpost in the Outer Rim, let alone the Jedi Temple, a massive, sprawling complex that is tucked away in the most expensive parts of Coruscant's real estate market. The cold reality is that in this galaxy and also in ours, money equals power. And so where the Jedi get their funding from really explains who the Jedi Order are as an institution. It's extremely important. Now, there's, again, not a lot of information in the lore about direct funding numbers, but I did find one factor about the Jedi Order, which it kind of explains just how wealthy they are in a very indisputable way. So the first step is trying to understand just how much money the Jedi Order actually needs to operate on a daily basis. And we can kind of ballpark estimate that by figuring out how much personnel the Jedi actually employ. A widely circulated number for the Jedi Order's manpower is 10,000 Jedi Knights, as Kanan Jarrus explains in the Rebels series. My interpretation is that 10,000 number doesn't just include Jedi Knights, but also Jedi Masters and potentially the Padawans they take into the field for missions. As in, the Jedi Order during the late Republic period probably had 10,000 units they could deploy to various theaters or, situations. We can probably also assume that there are at least another 30,000 Jedi who are younglings or initiates, along with the Jedi who have never passed the trials and instead becoming Padawans take the path of the service corps. There are actually tons of administrative jobs within the Order as well. You have a technical and logistical wing, medical personnel, security personnel that work along with the temple guards, along with tons of administrators. You also have specialty jobs like caretakers for remote outposts, and of course, paramilitary organizations like the Antarian Rangers who support the Jedi in the field. So I'm going to assume there are about 100,000 people working for the Jedi Order. 60,000 are non-force sensitive, 30,000 are non-Jedi Knights, Force sensitives, and then you have 10,000 Jedi Knights. 100,000 in total. Now, the great thing about recruiting Force sensitives as the Jedi Order is that you don't actually have to pay these individuals because you are, in theory, a monastic order, aka a religion, and you're probably granted some kind of non-profit status that not only helps you when tax season comes along, it also protects the Jedi Order from employment laws, right? The Galactic Republic has it written in its constitution that slavery is banned, and some might consider employment without pay as slavery. So the Jedi can avoid that by declaring, religious or non-profit status. Now, the Jedi Order is going to be covering all the living expenses of their 40,000 Jedi. That includes shelter, food, education, and basic tools and equipment for their day-to-day tasks, which is significantly cheaper than paying everyone's salary. It's a trick that a lot of labor recruitment agencies actually do, like, the Gulf states with all those big building projects. That's mostly labor agencies recruiting migrant workers from poorer nations to work there. I used to live in a neighborhood actually with a lot of South Asian H-1B applicants, like IT people, programmers, entry-level positions, but they were getting paid competitive wages as the law states. But what these recruitment agencies were doing, they were taking all the wages from their workers and they were just basically supplying these workers with cheap housing and transportation and food and then paying them a much smaller amount and taking whatever was left. Pretty immoral practice. Pretty immoral. The Jedi also take this route, but more because of the spiritual obligation of its members, who are forbidden attachments. Cutting off access to credits and ownership of property is designed to keep the Jedi more stable and not just a cost-saving measure. I would argue that it's also a better way to control the Jedi because, again, money is power, and if the Jedi have to go through the High Council or some kind of administrative system to get money, that means they really can't act independently. And so the Jedi Order save a lot of money by not giving their members salaries, and they actually save even more money because of things you might not think about when it comes to the living costs. For example, their education. All of their teachers are basically Jedi, and these are not paid individuals. And the Jedi Temple itself is pretty much a paid-off property. They don't have a mortgage on this, and I'm not even sure if they have to pay property taxes. So other than like maintenance costs and utility bills, the Jedi operation is pretty, it's pretty efficient, I guess, from a cost point of view. And so for the average Service Corps Jedi, or the younglings, I'm going to say that it costs the Jedi Order roughly 20,000 credits, or just about 50 credits a day to keep them going. We're also going to assume that the galactic credit and the US dollar trade like 1-to-1, just to make things simpler so you can kind of have a better grasp of how much this all costs in terms that we understand it. For the Jedi Knights, the funding is going to vary quite a lot depending on what they are doing, and I think, Jedi Knights in the field who are constantly traveling will need travel stipends and petty cash for interacting with the galaxy. I would peg them closer to around 100,000 credits a year, or roughly 275 credits a day to fund their operations. And so in total, that's roughly 1.6 billion credits to fund the Jedi. And then you have 60,000 non-Force sensitives. Let's say they get paid an average of, 60,000 credits. It's a pretty average salary, I think, for the galaxy. That brings the total for all salaries that the Jedi, that brings the, manpower costs for the Jedi Order to around 5.2 billion credits. Now, you might already be noticing something here. The Jedi Order is actually really a tiny organization. 10,000 Jedi Knights for an entire galaxy? I mean, that's not even enough people to patrol the Federal District in Coruscant. And 5.2 billion credits in labor costs is not as much as you would think. There are a lot of, I would say, mid-cap companies in our world that actually spend more than that. Take a look at UPS or FedEx. They spend anywhere from $20 to $30 billion on wages and benefits. A good comparison for the Jedi Order's wage and benefits cost would probably be Harvard, which pays all of their staff around $6 to $7 billion. And so that means the Jedi Order is a much smaller organization than you would think. Now, obviously, you have other costs like maintaining a fleet of starfighters, operations in the Outer Rim or outposts in the Outer Rim, and of course, funding that medical center on Coruscant is going to cost money as well. Generally, for most companies and even for most militaries, you're spending about 30 to 60% of all of your operating costs on wages and on your staff. And so if the Jedi spent 5.2 billion on labor, it can be assumed that their total annual budget for everything is around 8 to 17 billion credits. Again, not exactly the type of expenditure you would imagine for an organization that has to keep the entire galaxy safe. This budget is closer to that of a small mid-rim planetary defense force, or a small heavily fortified nation like Taiwan, or a large country without much defenses like Mexico. And honestly, the Galactic Republic is infinitely larger than any government we have here on Earth. I mean, they have thousands of member systems. The tax revenue is probably just, you can't even comprehend how much money that is. And so even the high end of this budget, 17 billion credits, is basically nothing. Just a tiny little drop in the larger judicial force's budget. This is actually really good for the Jedi, and even better for the Galactic Republic. Instead of employing a billion-man army, you just have 10,000 of these crazy force users who are more than willing to attempt the impossible. The Jedi and the High Council understand that any credits you accept through subsidiaries from the Galactic Republic are going to really limit the autonomy and neutrality of the Order. If someone gives you money, they essentially become your boss, and you don't want that. So if I were in charge of the Jedi Order, I would really limit what kind of funding I get from the central government. Maybe just like project-based pay for certain things like the creation and protection of the Starlight Beacon, and not much else. But if you actually take a look at how much wealth the Jedi Order holds, well, you begin to realize that the Jedi Order doesn't need help from anyone, even the Republic. And again, I don't need the Jedi Order's balance sheet to figure that out. The Jedi are crazy rich because they have operated as an organization for tens of thousands of years and can trace their roots to the foundation of the Galactic Republic. Any organization that operates for that long, they really benefit from the power of compounding. And if you're a young person and you're starting out on your financial journey, you're really going to want to learn about compounding. So let's say you have $1,000 and you can either invest it into a high risk fund that nets you anywhere from negative 10% to positive 10% annual growth. Or you can invest your money in a fund that trades bonds and has a steady 4% return with very small deviations. So if you're going to invest that money for 30 years, which fund do you choose? The high risk one or the low risk one? Well, 9 out of 10 times, probably even more than that, the low risk 4% fund is going to be the better bet. And the reason isn't that, 4% is some kind of magical number. It really isn't. If you put your money right now in a money market, you could get probably close to that. It's more that compounding punishes instability and rewards survival. Speculators and a lot of the analysts you see on TV, they're going to be talking about timing the market. They're going to have a lot of technical data. If you're options trading, there's the Greeks, and they kind of boil it down to a math and science, which in my opinion, is a wrong way to approach these kind of things. But the truth is, if you want to actually make money consistently for the rest of your life, the most important thing you have to do is to make sure you stay in the game and limit your losses. Everything else will take care of itself, and the only thing you really need to worry is for society to completely collapse, at which point, why you even care about your portfolio anyway? It's not to say you shouldn't speculate. I speculate with, maybe like 10% of my portfolio or just like money I can afford to lose, but my base foundation for all my investments are, relatively low risk, and maybe they don't have the biggest returns, but I'm all for that consistency. And so $1,000 over 30 years at a 4% return rate will get you around $3,243.40. That represents a modest, 300% growth rate. And listen, that might not seem like a lot, but remember, you're consistently getting 4% every year. Whereas if you go with a high risk fund, you might beat that 4% fund 5 or 10 times, but it's the losses that really hurt you. And that's what people don't realize. You could have a good year, you could be up 40, 50% in a year. That's happened to me before, but it's not consistent. There's no way you can guarantee that consistency, and a minus 10 year will set you back significantly. So $1,000 over 30 years at 4% return rate compounds just north of $3,000. But guess what happens when you extend that time frame to 100 years? That $1,000 turns into $50,000. That's a return of over 5,000%. And now if we push that time frame to 1,000 years, your $1,000 is going to be worth $108 quintillion, or $108 million trillion. Or is it a billion trillion? I don't even care at that point. There's just so many zeros. It's a crazy amount of money. This is the magic of compounding. It starts out slow, but then it starts to snowball as you continue to reinvest your 4% gains every year. In the long run, things begin to kind of blow up out of control. Now, what makes the Jedi Order so crazy is they start out with a lot more than 1,000 credits, and they also lasted for a lot longer than 1,000 years. And if I actually try to figure out what the compound interest of 4% is over 25,000 years, my computer will probably seppuku itself. It's just, I'm not going to do that. And so when we frame the question, how rich is the Jedi Order? It's not even about the assets they hold, what valuable lightsabers or Sith artifacts, which planets. It really is about the resilience of the Order, its ability to maintain a coherent organization and structure continuously for such a ridiculously long period of time. This is actually the biggest argument you can make against those anti-Jedi people, which, okay, I'm actually a part of I am an anti-Jedi person in some ways. Yeah, but the fact that this organization has survived for 25,000 years alone should make us all study this organization and how it creates this longevity. It's simply a miracle, and there's definitely something the Jedi are doing really right to be able to exist for that long. And, it's for the same reason that older founder corporations in Star Wars and a lot of the core planets are also going to be immensely rich because of that compound factor. Now, basically, because the Jedi Order has been around for so long, how much money they start out with doesn't even matter. They don't even really need to make 4%. They could even make 1% over 25,000 years, as long as they have consistently at least zero growth or at least a little growth. They'll have so much money that 18 billion credits will be a micro fraction of 1% 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 of their wealth. That's how rich the Jedi are. And the crazy thing about the Jedi is they didn't just start out with a fixed amount of money and let that money grow through smart investments. They're actually constantly bringing in money from all sorts of sources. They're probably making enough money every year just by doing random stuff to cover their expenses. At their base, you have the Jedi Temple itself, a prime piece of real estate on the surface of Coruscant, so valuable that even all the money and prestige in the galaxy could afford to buy it. Such complexes are probably worth entire mid-rim systems. That's how valuable this real estate is. And while this is far from a liquid asset, the Jedi aren't going to sell this, obviously. The Jedi could easily use that building as collateral for crazy loans. Having access to capital is what allows the Jedi to expand and grow without any Republic oversight or funding. It's what allows them to build all those outposts, the temples. It's what funds their missions to the peripherals of the galaxy where they find new hyperspace lanes, new species, new resources. So those are all expenses. So where are the Jedi's revenue streams coming from? Well, the Jedi role in exploring and finding hyperspace lanes probably made the Jedi Temple extremely rich just by itself. Hyperspace surveyors weren't just going out there to risk their lives for the good of the galaxy. They were getting really good compensation for every route they discovered, because every new hyperspace route that cuts down travel time saves companies a lot of money. The Jedi, because of their exploration, were also running into all sorts of new commodities, new flora, new species that could be monetized. You can license things, you can sell commodities, give people rights to certain things, or just, be hired as a contractor so you can explain to them what you've seen. The Jedi were not anti-capitalist or anti-free markets. They just weren't greedy or chaotic people. And honestly, the best investors generally are like that as well. They look for steady and honest gains that ideally don't hurt anyone, because you don't want drama, you don't want unnecessary risks. You just want something that is boring and that will continuously give you gains. The Jedi also don't really need to make that much money. It's just a side effect of their supernatural abilities. These Jedi can go to places that normal beings are too afraid to or vulnerable to go to. That is real value that they have, that they can go on these adventures to all these crazy places where normal humans can't survive. But also, most people in the galaxy really look at the Jedi in a positive way. Actually, in the old days, it wasn't uncommon for rich families or noble families to donate money to the Jedi Order when they select one of their children. I'm also pretty sure that when the Jedi save rich people, those very rich people are also willing to give gifts and donate to the temple. Not all that different from people in our world who donate to schools or museums, churches. These are institutions that provide great benefit for society, and the Jedi Order is definitely going to fit into that category. And honestly, if you have that kind of money and you aren't investing back into your community, you are a piece of shit. Let's be honest. And so the Jedi Order's balance sheet is probably holding a significant portion of galactic wealth, potentially single-digit percentages, which is kind of crazy. But just look at the Jedi Temple. You know how many priceless artifacts are hidden in that building? How many holocrons that have hidden secrets that could be monetized? I mean, what about the planet of Ilum or Jeddah? The Jedi controlled all major kyber crystal deposits in the galaxy, and they created massive scarcity for these crystals by not allowing anyone to look at them. The funny thing is, if you really want to be an investor, not a speculator, not a trader, but an investor, the Jedi Order is a great example to follow. First, they keep emotions out of everything, and they are extremely disciplined. That is the bedrock of a good investor. Greed and hunger can also really lead you down the wrong path and into some pretty dangerous positions, especially if you don't take the time to get properly educated and do the research about the things you're investing in. I mean, today with all the resources available out there, it's crazy how many people are willing to essentially put big money on companies or assets that they can't explain. Why would you do that? It's like Anakin running headfirst into a blast of Sith lightning. Investing is all about avoiding the trends and avoiding all of the big stories that are circulating in the news, because the truth is, if everyone already is talking about it, ship has sailed. You're not going to do much. You're probably going to end up losing money if you're not careful. The human brain is simply terrible at assessing risk, and so you have to really try to not let your intuition, your brain take over when you're investing. It's very counterintuitive, I guess. And again, I think because the Jedi Order were so terrified of the human side of their members, this actually ironically made them the perfect portfolio company, because any company, again, that lasts 25,000 years is going to be the richest entity in the known universe. Just simple math. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification button down below so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. As usual, my name is Alan, reminding you my allegiance is to the Republic, to democracy. I'll see you next time.